A few years ago, I was exploring the works of one of my favorite anime directors that I've mentioned frequently on this channel, Hiroyuki Imaishi, and I stumbled across a show called Cutie Honey. A show that not only had Imaishi's involvement, but was also produced by Studio Gainax and had an episode directed by Neon Genesis Evangelion director Hideaki Anno. So obviously this series piqued my attention. I ended up watching it and having a lot of fun with it. I of course enjoyed the parts directed by Imaishi, but I enjoyed the rest of it as well. However, I felt I couldn't fully appreciate the show because it was part of a larger franchise that I was completely unfamiliar with. But since I had so much fun with Cutie Honey, I figured that later on down the line, I might revisit the franchise and see what else it had to offer. Because of recent world events delaying a lot of recent new movies coming out, I've been going through my watch list and watching things that I've been putting off for a long time. And one of those things on that list was this franchise. So when I decided to make the plunge into this franchise, I of course went back to the original series that aired in 1973. And what I discovered is that Cutie Honey was actually one of the first magical girls in anime. In fact, she was such an early precursor to what we now know as a magical girl anime that she originally was not considered to be that. She was originally just a science fiction superhero created for young boys. The show was based on a manga by Go Nagai, the creator of a lot of other classic anime like Devilman. The setup of the show follows Honey Kisaragi after her father is killed by the evil organization Panther Claw, who wants a device that he's created that basically creates any object you want out of thin air. But despite how much power that might give somebody, the only reason Panther Claw wants it is to basically get rich and have a bunch of pretty stuff. In a posthumous message he leaves for Honey, he reveals that she is an android that he created, and that she has the matter transformer built right into her body, which will become more important a little later on. After seeing her father be killed by Panther Claw, Honey vows to avenge her father by killing every member of Panther Claw by utilizing the device that he built inside of her. After the initial setup episode, every other episode basically follows a generic Monster of the Week formula. Panther Claw will unleash a new foe to attack Honey and find the matter transformer, or they go after some other valuable object. This often leads to either Honey herself or other people being put in danger, and Honey has to use her transformation powers to outwit or confuse the villains. Throughout every episode, she transforms into several different disguises, up until the end of the episode when the villain has had enough and finally asks her, "Who the hell are you?" And that's when she explains that she's been disguising herself the entire episode, revealing all of her different disguises, ending the monologue by saying, "But what I really am is," and then uttering her signature catchphrase, before transforming into her superhero alter ego, Cutie Honey. Then she fights the villain, wins, and the episode is over. It sounds like a really boring and repetitive series, but I've got to tell you, I absolutely fell in love with it. Right from the get-go, I was in love with the aesthetic of this series. The art, background, and character designs are all just fantastic. They're colorful and stylish in a really 70s way. There's a lot of impressive camera work here that I did not expect from a 1973 series. In terms of direction and production quality, it's certainly better than a lot of 70s stuff, and I would go so far as to say it's still better than a lot of stuff that comes out today. One of my favorite moments in the show is when it fully leans into its psychedelic 70s style, and Cutie Honey starts fighting off goons against a rainbow backdrop while they're standing on a rainbow, and all of the characters are basically silhouettes moving around this background. Meanwhile, the camera is spinning around the action happening. But before you even get to any of that stuff, the first thing you're going to notice about this show is the first thing that plays at the beginning of every episode, and that's the opening. I'm just gonna go ahead and say it now, this is one of the best anime openings ever. It's really catchy, it's really fun, it has stylish and energetic visuals to go along with it, and in Japan at least, it has been so iconic that it is reused in almost every Cutie Honey anime and has been covered by many famous Japanese artists. Hell, even by the first episode, the show was so aware of how catchy its opening theme was that they had the main character sing it. Aside from the song itself, there's just a lot to admire about the opening animation. The opening is basically a teaser to everything you'll experience in the episode. It features montages of exciting action scenes, and contains really silly sexual innuendos. One thing I think is really cool about the opening, and not something I've seen a lot of, is that in addition to music, whenever action is going on in the animation, sound effects will play too. I think it just helps elevate the overall energy and excitement of the opening. And this opening theme is reincorporated often in the soundtrack, with different variations and takes on it depending on the mood of the scene. In fact, the whole soundtrack to this series is great. It is full of memorable, catchy tunes, whether you're talking about the themes for the villains, or just the stuff that plays in the background of random scenes. It's all really charming and fun music. The ending theme to every episode is really great as well. As for the contents of the episodes themselves, again, what I explained basically sounds really dry and repetitive and kind of dull, but there's so many things that make this formula work. Obviously, there's a new villain each time, but each of these villains is so quirky and weird. Part of the entertainment value of the show for me was seeing what villain was going to be dispatched by Panther Claw the next episode. I mean, these villains get really absurd. There's one that's basically just called Boob Claw because her boobs can transform into arms. No, I'm not joking, it's really weird and kind of hilarious. It's also really fun to watch the main character transform throughout the episodes. Like I said, oftentimes she uses her disguises to either outwit the villains or confuse them, or because a situation really requires that particular disguise. While there are some favorite recurring disguises that have become staples within the franchise, a lot of the disguises that Cutie Honey wears are unique from episode to episode. And every time she transforms, there is a unique animation sequence that accompanies it. It's not like Sailor Moon or any other modern magical girl show, which basically recycles the same transformation animation over and over. No, this show animates a unique transformation sequence every single episode. So when you combine this classic build-up with the fantastic animation and creativity on display with that great music that calls back to the awesome opening sequence, you get a really exciting final scene that I look forward to seeing every single episode. And then of course everything after that is so exciting too because she's fighting all these weird villains, like people whose boobs turn into arms. And then on top of all of that, sometimes she straight up decapitates and impales people with her sword, despite the entire tone of the episode being fun and lighthearted. It's just so weird and kind of funny. It's like, oh, here's this happy-go-lucky superhero who's talking about how she's fighting for love, but she just straight up decapitated you. In addition to her transformation powers and her sword, which I just mentioned, she also has a boomerang and anti-gravity boots that allow her to jump really high and basically walk on any surface. In terms of the overall story of the show, I kind of have to admire it, because unlike some other episodic monster or adventure of the week type series, this actually does have some sort of steady progression about it. Each episode and each battle is filled with this suspense because the villains might find out that Cutie Honey is the MacGuffin that they're looking for. Then you also have the tension between Cutie Honey and her adoptive family, who don't know that she's Cutie Honey, and so she has to keep her identity a secret from them. And yeah, her adoptive family isn't something I've mentioned yet. After her father dies, she takes refuge with a guy named Seiji, his perverted father Dunbei, and his kid brother Junpei. They're a funny group of guys who basically just all have the hots for Honey. This could really make the show disgusting and offensive, but the entire family just has this dynamic between them that works. All of their advances towards her are so silly and over the top that it's hard to be offended by them or take them seriously at all. But the male characters of the show having a thing for Honey isn't the only sexual thing in the show. Cutie Honey was originally made to appeal to teenage boys, so there's a lot of really eye-winking innuendos throughout the show. Her signature phrase, Honey Flash, is basically a reference to the fact that when she transforms, all of her clothes momentarily come off, so she is essentially flashing the audience. Obviously, it's not graphic nudity, she basically has a Barbie doll body in every episode, but still. Then of course, you have the signature line that she utters at the end of every opening. which, again, is sort of an eye wink to the audience about her transformation sequence. And then you have the villains of the show, who are basically all scantily clad women. But again, all of this is so silly and over the top that it's hard not to enjoy. And it's not like the show is without heart either. Sure, all three of the guys in her adopted family sexualize her, including the old man, which is really, really creepy, but there's a genuine underlying relationship there that's hard not to get attached to. I also think it's made up for because in every other episode, all three of these guys end up finding themselves in danger and have to be saved by Cutie Honey, which is a pretty progressive choice for the early 70s. When the episode happens in the middle of the show where her secret identity is revealed to her family, and Panther Claw find out the secret of the Matter Transformer, it's honestly such a great episode. The way it's able to balance the tension of the drama of that episode with the fun tone that it usually has is honestly really cool. And this is the episode that cemented Honey's relationship with the male characters for me. The scene where her family consoles her and accepts her for who she really is, I feel is just really wholesome. Moments like that frame the relationship between Honey and these male characters in a really positive light that overshadows all of the other pervy moments that are just played for comedy. However, the second half of the show after that episode flounders a bit because the tension of the villains finding out that Honey is the Matter Transformer is basically gone, and their revelation of this fact doesn't really change the formula of the episode that much. They just go from asking, "Where's the Matter Transformer?" to "Give me the Matter Transformer." And the same thing basically applies with the family finding out her secret identity. Not much changes there. While I can forgive all that because the formula as is still really fun, the last few episodes of the show basically run out of creative steam, and the series just kind of limps across the finish line without even tying up all its loose ends. Even so, this is an extremely fun series. It's super weird, super 70s, super creative, and it never takes itself too seriously. And it's really funny too. Part of the humor is of course going to be a little ironic just because of how dated the show is and because of the combination of all these weird elements. But a lot of the comedy written into the show is actually still pretty funny, with the exception of the pervy grandfather and this one teacher character who I'm not sure is supposed to be a homophobic joke or a transphobic joke. And again, I just have to reiterate, the amount of creativity and effort that was put into the visuals, music, and structure of each episode is what makes it so entertaining. Everything here just feels so top-notch in a classic way. This is not one of those things where, oh, it came first, but other things perfected it. Cutie Honey already had the Magical Girl formula so down pat before there really even was a Magical Girl formula that every episode you will be excited to watch her transform, because it's just that cool. This is a series I would recommend to a lot of people who might not even be interested in it on the surface. As someone who grew up loving superheroes, this definitely has that classic superhero comic book vibe. And if you're a fan of old superhero cartoons and comic books, then I think this will be up your alley. And of course, it goes without saying that if you're a fan of Magical Girl anime, you really need to check this out. Obviously, coming off the 25 episode hype train that was the original series, I was ready to binge watch the rest of this franchise. And that's exactly what I did. So after I finished the original show, I started watching Shin Cutie Honey, or as its English title would translate to, New Cutie Honey. Now, despite the apparent popularity and influence of the original series, Shin Cutie Honey didn't actually come out until the early 90s, so there was almost a 20-year gap between the original show and this one. And on top of that, it's not even a TV anime, it's just a straight-to-video OVA, which is even more surprising considering that it's a soft sequel to the original series. However, with it being a soft sequel and more of a reboot, it unfortunately does not pick up the story where the original series left off. It takes place years into the future. The character of Dunbei is a lot older, he has robotic implants that give him weird powers and weapons, and the character of Honey herself has basically forgotten who she is, despite the fact that her superhero persona, Cutie Honey, has basically become an urban legend. All of these are kind of strange choices, but ultimately they help to make an exciting first episode, because the entire episode is basically building up to Honey remembering who she is and making a kick-ass return as Cutie Honey. All in all, the way the first episode of the show is paced and presented is really fun, and if it was just its own standalone short film, I would actually rate this OVA really high. But unfortunately, this is not the only episode in the show, and the show has a lot of problems. The first is that the tone is a lot darker, more serious, and really edgy. but of course those things are in line with the general style of early 90s and late 80s anime that were coming out at the time. Just like those anime, this one has lots of gore and unnecessary nudity, and overall the dark edginess of the show just takes away from the fun. The original series was so lighthearted, and despite some of the more mature and adult elements, it never took itself too seriously and just reveled in its own silliness. Don't get me wrong, lots of the base elements of the character of Cutie Honey are still here. One of the only things absent from this show is the original family dynamic. Although Dunbei returns for this sequel, neither of the other two male cast members make a return. Instead, they're replaced by another family who gets involved in the conflict. And while they try to use this family to replicate the same dynamic that was in the original show, it just isn't the same. And in addition to episode 1, episode 5 is also a lot of fun. It's basically one giant highway chase as the villains have some sort of bomb or something. I can't remember. All I remember is that it was a lot of fun. I would say the biggest problem for this sequel though is that it just seems so pointless. There's no real driving force behind the story. In the original show, you always had that sense of progression. The villains had a clear goal, Cutie Honey had a clear goal, and even though both parties were moving towards their goal at a snail's pace, it still felt like things were happening. But here, not even that is present. Panther Claw isn't even really in the show, and the villains that aren't in the show are really cliche and forgettable. And because these villains aren't directly part of Panther Claw, it sort of takes away part of the tension between Cutie Honey's conflict. She basically has no motivation to fight these people besides the fact that they're evil. There's no longer that sense of justice and vengeance that drove her in the original series. In fact, that motivation is barely brought up at all in this show. Honestly, I didn't even watch it that long ago, and I can't even tell you what the plot of this series was. I can't remember what the villains wanted, and I certainly can't remember why Cutie Honey got involved with them in the first place. Everything just sort of happened, and it served no other purpose than to get from action scene to action scene. When the show finally ends, it basically doesn't wrap up at all. There's no semblance of a conclusion whatsoever. The last episode just kind of happens, which is disappointing when you have a short pre-planned OVA series. You'd think at the very least they'd have the foresight to make a satisfying conclusion. But in fact, they don't even try to conclude anything at all. There was also lots more of what you might call cliché anime stuff added in this show. Cutie Honey herself has several Dragon Ball Z-esque power-up moments here. For example, in the first episode, her sword just kind of turns into a giant energy beam. There's also the kind of really stupid stuff that you would only see in a generic cliché anime. For example, there's this scene where Cutie Honey is being pinned down and electrocuted, and in between her screaming in pain, they basically have a full conversation about the villain's plan. And then after they get done having this 5-minute long conversation in between screams of pain, Cutie Honey inexplicably overcomes the villain. It's honestly pretty funny. I also want to mention the opening theme here. I really enjoyed the more rock-style take on the Cutie Honey theme. However, in the second half of the series, the opening changes to an English version, which is not very good at all. This series also has some impressive production values, the animation is pretty good, and just like the original series, every single transformation scene is completely different. Overall, this series does still contain some of the more charming elements of the original series, but the more serious tone, the lack of Panther Claw, and a more cliché anime storytelling style makes for a much weaker experience. Now it's at this point that we sort of have to take a detour, because around the same time that Shin Cutie Honey came out, another anime came out that became wildly popular across the world and greatly influenced the Cutie Honey franchise. And that anime is of course Sailor Moon. I don't think many people would disagree that Sailor Moon was basically the first magical girl to get worldwide popularity. She basically popularized the genre as we know it, and was pretty much responsible for the resurgence of the Cutie Honey character in the late 90s and early 2000s. So since Sailor Moon is such an important magical girl show that even had some impact on its predecessor Cutie Honey, I felt it necessary to watch some of it to at least give some context to the later era of the Cutie Honey franchise. And I've got to say that I had a better perception of this show before I watched it, because Sailor Moon is not good. Now, I understand that me saying that will probably anger a lot of people because there's a lot of people who really like this anime, a lot of people who grew up with it, and so they're very nostalgic about it and they have a lot of personal attachment for it, but this isn't me being hyperbolic or me trying to be a contrarian. This show just really was not for me. I think immediately the show rubbed me the wrong way because while I did expect Cutie Honey to have a significant amount of influence over Sailor Moon, I don't think I quite expected what I got. Because many of the base elements of Sailor Moon are basically lifted from Cutie Honey. There's a shadowy organization that Sailor Moon has to fight who's after a MacGuffin, and they dispatch a new monster every week that either goes after this MacGuffin or that goes after some sort of valuable object. Even Sailor Moon's powers are identical to Cutie Honey's. The real nail in the coffin for me was in episode 3 when she's given a pin that lets her change her appearance at will. I mean, that is literally the entire gimmick behind the character of Cutie Honey, and Sailor Moon just looked at it and said, yep, that's mine now. Now, I'm not trying to paint Sailor Moon as just a straight ripoff of Cutie Honey. There are a lot of changes to the base elements that it took from older magical girl shows. However, most of these changes are really only made to appeal to kids. Sailor Moon is a middle schooler with teenage problems and issues and concerns. She gets her powers from a talking cat. You get the picture. A lot of the changes here are basically just made to appeal to its main demographic. With all that being said, I can see why so many people would have gotten attached to this character as kids, because it probably would have been really easy for me to relate to this character if I was 12 or 13 years old. But watching it for the first time as an adult, you're not going to have that personal connection to the character. Aside from the show being derivative and not really connecting with me personally, both of which are things I can forgive, there are other problems in the show that keep me from enjoying it. The first thing I noticed is that the animation is really cheap and just all around not good. You can tell there's lots of cut corners, there's lots of characters and images that just sort of slide across the screen, and there's a lot of that cliche, budget-saving stuff that you would see in a lot of 90s anime. Now obviously I did start this discussion by saying I did not watch all of Sailor Moon. I only watched a handful of episodes to sort of get the gist of what the show was. But based on those first few episodes I watched, I could tell when it started it didn't really have a really big budget. Ironically enough, that sort of resulted in some of its more iconic elements though. For example, the Sailor Moon transformation sequence. However, I can't really celebrate this transformation sequence because of the trend it started. Because of the show's low budget, they basically reused the same transformation scene over and over and over in every episode. And I'm no anime expert, I don't know if this was the first anime to do this or even the one that popularized it, but either way, every magical girl anime afterwards has basically done the same thing. Instead of the unique transformation sequences that you get every episode with Cutie Honey, you get the exact same one every single time. In comparison, I think it's really boring and really lazy, and I can't help but hold Sailor Moon partially responsible for that trend. I also didn't like the character of Sailor Moon herself. I found her to be really grating and annoying. She's loud, obnoxious, and she is constantly whining. In the episodes that I watched, she was so incompetent that every time she encountered an enemy, she would just sit around and scream and cry until either her talking cat or this character called Tuxedo Mask told her to shut the fuck up and actually start fighting. And then of course afterwards she almost instantly kills the villain. It was a very annoying sequence of events that I had to watch unfold time after time. Again, I can see how these things of being unsure of what you need to do and being unsure of your role in the world can be relatable for kids and teenagers. And I'm sure that helped a lot of its audience grow attached to the character. However, that doesn't mean that it was executed well. And again, for me as an adult watching it, it just really got on my nerves. Now, I can see how the story could progress in a way where Sailor Moon would be a really good character. As she matures, she slowly grows in confidence in her abilities and her role as a superhero, and I'm sure at the end of the series, she's probably a really badass character. However, a lot of what's presented in the first few episodes isn't enticing enough for me to continue watching up to that point. During Sailor Moon's 5 or so years on Japanese television, Cutie Honey was basically completely absent from the television. Sure, Shin Cutie Honey did come out during Sailor Moon's run, but that was an OVA anime, meaning that it was just straight to video. There really had not been a Cutie Honey anime made for TV in 20 years. And with Sailor Moon making magical girl anime a worldwide success, it was time for the queen to reclaim her throne.
Honey Flash!
Cutie Honey Flash was the character's triumphant return to television, and as you might have guessed based on that opening, this was a pretty bold reinvention and modernization of the character. After all, this is the first Cutie Honey anime to be made post-Sailor Moon, so this show takes a lot of cues from Sailor Moon, and that's definitely no coincidence. After Sailor Moon ended its TV run 5 or so years after it started, a lot of the animation staff from that show jumped onto this Cutie Honey project, which explains why the art style of Cutie Honey Flash is so similar to Sailor Moon. But the aesthetics weren't the only thing changed to appeal to fans of Sailor Moon. They really toned down a lot of the violence and especially the sexual appeal of the original show. Of course, there is still some cartoonish violence, but there are no decapitations or impalements like the original 1970s show. And there are some provocative outfits that have stuck around from earlier iterations, but overall, this iteration of the character isn't sexualized at all. There's also a larger focus on Cutie Honey's school life, which in the original series was mostly just downplayed. Also similar to Sailor Moon, there's a mysterious male figure that throws around flowers and that Cutie Honey develops a crush on. The look of the lair for Sister Jill and Panther Claw also looks really similar to the evil villain lair from Sailor Moon. But trying to appeal to Sailor Moon fans isn't the only way that the style of the show changed. This iteration of Cutie Honey is also way more melodramatic. Half of the first episode is dedicated to Cutie Honey trying to save her father from being killed, something that doesn't happen in any of the other iterations. Usually she just finds him dead and that's the end of it. But not only does the first episode elongate and dramatize this death scene, it also doesn't kill her dad at all. In this version of Cutie Honey, he's captured by Panther Claw, and the rest of the show is Cutie Honey trying to rescue him. It's definitely an interesting change to the origin story, and I suppose it's more suitable for the younger audience it was aiming for. But it also creates this ripple effect that changes other things in the story. For example, eventually Panther Claw gets him to admit that Cutie Honey has the matter transformer. This is opposed to the original series where Panther Claw just automatically went after Cutie Honey. And about Cutie Honey and the matter transformer, that's another interesting change that this show makes. From what I could tell, it doesn't seem that Cutie Honey is actually an android in this version. She's actually his biological daughter. The choker she wears is basically the matter transformer, unlike the original series where the choker was only part of the matter transformer and the rest of it was built inside of her android body. Two characters from the original male trio return. Doonbei returns as the school principal, but he's no longer an old pervert. He still serves as comedic relief, but the jokes are mostly kid-friendly. Not that I think that's a bad thing. Seiji also comes back as a reporter who helps Cutie Honey. All of these changes are really intriguing, and the first episode itself was promising enough, but once I got past my initial excitement to see where all of these changes would lead, I've got to say that this is probably the worst Cutie Honey anime right behind another abomination that I'll get to later. Like I said before, this iteration is very melodramatic, and that's not really a good thing because it takes itself way too seriously. Cutie Honey has always been a really silly and fun character. Everything about her origin, who she's fighting, who she is just over the top and dumb. It doesn't really make sense for this character to take herself really seriously. That isn't to say that there aren't silly moments within the episodes, but overall the tone is a lot less cohesively fun, and focuses a lot more on serious drama. However, there is one episode that utilized this dark dramatic tone in a way that I really liked. Episode 10 begins with Cutie Honey losing her eyesight because of a battle with a villain. The rest of the episode is basically her falling into an existential crisis because she can no longer see. Obviously, this is a huge departure from the regular Cutie Honey formula. It subverts basically everything you've come to expect from a Cutie Honey episode. The episode starts with the battle already happening, and then the rest of the episode is just the character reflecting on who she is, her own life, and how she's going to move forward with her new disability. It's also the best of the episodes that I watched, because it subverts some of the formulas that this show introduces. In every episode of this show, she ends every fight by using her finishing move, Honey Lightning Flare, which basically kills the villain instantly. Obviously, this is really lazy writing, and it takes any tension out of the battle scenes. Not that there would be much tension anyway, because the battles usually don't last that long. Usually they last just long enough to pad the episode out to 24 minutes, and once it gets to that point, Cutie Honey just uses her finishing move and the battle's over. And there's also no rhyme or reason as to why Cutie Honey wouldn't just use this move to start off with. It's just a bad addition to the show overall. But in episode 10, her finishing move doesn't work on the villain. This both has to do with the villain's abilities and the fact that, she can't see. So she has to work with Seiji to find another way to defeat this villain. It was a conflict that was actually interesting and engaging, and the rest of the episode served to flesh out Cutie Honey as a character in a way that really hasn't been presented before. If the show was filled with episodes like this, it would honestly be really great. But unfortunately it isn't. It tries to have this dark, dramatic tone, while at the same time maintaining the traditional monster of the week, silly over-the-top battle show that people know and love. And it just really doesn't work. If you're going to be a dark and dramatic Cutie Honey anime, then change the story to fit that style. Otherwise, you're just ruining what worked in the first place. What makes this even worse is that for the first 12 episodes of the show, there is no sense of progression at all. Panther Claw has basically no goal during this period of the show. They're just looting random places and Cutie Honey stops them because they're doing something bad. They're not even after the matter transformer in most of the episodes. Sister Jill is literally told early on in the show that the matter transformer can wait till later. Every episode until episode 13 is really just filler. After about 12 episodes of nothing really happening, that's when her dad finally tells Panther Claw that she's the matter transformer, and the story finally starts moving again. But once that happens, the show blows its load early by killing Sister Jill in episode 13. That's right, the big final battle happens 13 episodes into the show, and she even rescues her dad, but for some convoluted reason, he literally just won't go with her and decides to stay with Panther Claw. So up until this point, if you were boiling this show down to the essential episodes that only moved the story along, there would really only be about 4. The first 2 episodes, maybe episode 12, and definitely episode 13. After that, the show just completely forgets the conflict between Cutie Honey and Panther Claw. From episode 14 on, we follow Cutie Honey's conflict with her evil twin sister, Misty Honey, who is apparently abandoned by their dad and who resents Cutie Honey for being able to live with him. Now, this conflict lasts for a really long time. I didn't even get to the end of it. I watched 19 episodes of this 49 episode show, and when I stopped, this conflict was still going on. Now, to be fair, this conflict could make for a really good story. There's a lot of groundwork here that could make for something really engaging. But like everything else in the show, it's just not executed well. And it's a shame because Misty Honey is the most interesting and badass character in the entire show. But the potential for the story here is weakened by poor writing. There's a considerable lack of tension between the two characters. In each episode, they'll fight at the end and exchange words about how they grew up differently and how Misty Honey hates Cutie Honey and resents her. But at the beginning of the next episode, they kinda just pretend like none of it ever happened, and it's barely even mentioned until they fight again at the end of that episode. Now, I understand if this was their attempts to make Misty Honey a more compelling villain. Perhaps the intention was to show her psychologically manipulating Honey, perhaps to make her think she's going crazy or to turn her friends against her, but nothing like that ever happens. She just pretends to be buddy-buddy with her, she throws in some not-so-subtle hints that she hates her guts, they fight, and the episode ends. And this formula repeats itself for episodes on end. Like I mentioned before, in this show there's no real sense of progression. The tension doesn't really build on itself. Nothing really moves anywhere for a long time. And if all of that wasn't enough, in the middle of this sister-sister conflict, it still tries to be a Monster of the Week show. Basically, monsters will appear out of nowhere and interrupt the ongoing conflict. So not only is this interesting story made boring by bad writing, but it's also constantly interrupted by frivolous battles that mean nothing. Like I said, there was really only so much of this I could take, so after episode 19, I just quit. This show is overall just a massive disappointment, especially in comparison to its absolute banger of an opening. Which sometimes rivals the original opening in my mind as being the best. However, nothing in the actual show is as exciting or well produced as that opening. Even the production quality of this show is a lot worse than the previous Cutie Honey entries. Because of this poor animation, there are some scenes that are just downright hilarious. In episode 12, there's this scene where Sister Jill is walking towards Cutie Honey, threatening her, and I kid you not, it lasts for about a solid minute, with one shot showing Sister Jill walking towards her, another shot showing Cutie Honey terrified, another shot of Sister Jill walking towards her, another shot of Cutie Honey terrified. You get the point. It goes on for a really long time. There's another scene later on in the show where Cutie Honey turns into a carpenter, and there's this weird montage where she's hammering nails while wildly yelling. and at the end of the montage, it's revealed that she nailed up all of the bad guys to the wall and the ceiling. It's such a strange, obnoxious, lazy, and confusing way to communicate what happened. And on that note, despite this show being really serious and dramatic, there's still a lot of really weird shit in this show. In one episode, she transforms into a crab and a duck for pretty much no reason. In another episode, her and her sister have a really intense tennis match, and when Misty Honey hits the ball, she hits it so hard that it creates craters in the concrete wall behind them. For a scene that takes itself so seriously, it was really hilariously over the top. And I could be mistaken, but I feel like this scene could be the inspiration for a similar scene in Kill la Kill. There's also a lot of unintentionally funny moments that happen as a result of the writing. There's an episode where Cutie Honey starts having a mental breakdown because she thinks her crush has fallen in love with a little girl. And not in a way that's like, oh, my crush is kind of a pedophile. More like in the way of, oh my god, I've lost my crush to this girl. He thinks this girl is better than me. Oh my god, how can I compete with this girl? It was just really stupid. Overall, Cutie Honey Flash is a very weak entry into this franchise. It has poor production quality, weak writing, and an ineffective combination of self-serious drama and the monster of the week formula that we've come to expect. And honestly, I just scratched the surface of the problems with this show. There are so many more notes that I took down while watching this show, just laughing at how bad it was. But for the sake of time, I'm not going to cover everything I jotted down, because at this point, I'm sure you get the picture. It's just not a good show. After an adaptation as bad as this, the franchise was in terrible need of rejuvenation, and rejuvenation is exactly what this franchise got with Cutie Honey. At this point in my binge watch of the Cutie Honey franchise, I had come full circle back to what introduced me to the character. But even though I had seen this show already, I felt the need to watch it again because now the context from which I'm approaching it is completely different. When I first watched Cutie Honey, I had no idea there was a franchise connected to it, I had no idea what Cutie Honey even was, and so while it was an enjoyable experience, I was a little fuzzy on the entire thing. So I'm really glad I rewatched this because I enjoyed it a lot more now that I know what Cutie Honey is. Cutie Honey is a 3-episode OVA series made by Studio Gainax. Each of the 3 episodes had a different director, with the most notable being Hiroyuki Imaishi, who directed episode 1, and Hideaki Anno, who directed the last episode. While the overall visual presentation and animation style of the show remains consistent, the way the animation, tone, and visuals of the show are crafted and communicated vary wildly between the episodes. Cutie Honey basically let 3 different anime directors make their own unique Cutie Honey short films. If you're familiar at all with Imaishi's other work, it won't come as a surprise to you that the first episode of Cutie Honey is incredibly over the top, energetic, and humorous. It is by far my favorite of the 3 episodes, and it does a really good job of making you excited to watch the rest of the show. Episode 2 unfortunately didn't have as great of a director attached to it, so it is the weakest of the episodes, but it does still have some interesting ideas and concepts within it. Namely, it brings up some of the concepts that Captain America Civil War brings up in that movie, but obviously this show came out more than a decade prior to that, but it basically just has the police and the public at large confronting Cutie Honey about the destruction that her battles cause. And then episode 3, directed by Hideaki Anno, is without a doubt the darkest and most serious of the episodes. It's really psychological, exploring the character and psyche of Cutie Honey, which sounds like it could be boring and executed just as bad as some of the worst episodes of Cutie Honey Flash, but because it's Hideaki Anno, it's actually really engaging and interesting. And if you're a fan of Neon Genesis Evangelion, there are going to be a lot of visuals here that feel familiar to you. The reason Cutie Honey works at all is because of the way it updates the character and the franchise for a modern audience. It does this in several ways, and one of the ways is that it is basically a self-aware spoof of the original series. This series is under no illusion that the world is the same as it was in the 1970s when Cutie Honey first debuted on television. When Cutie Honey came out, it changed anime. When Sailor Moon came out, it changed anime. As a result, in the 21st century, a lot of the tropes presented within the Cutie Honey franchise feel like cliches nowadays. And instead of trying to get rid of these tropes or trying to repackage them in a super serious story, Cutie Honey goes full ham in embracing those cliches, even when it makes the show come off as silly. In fact, it's the innate silliness of its cliches that the show fully embraces. It doesn't shy away from looking stupid or campy. Instead, it takes the silly, campy nature of the character to a whole new level. The result is basically a friendly jab at the franchise so far, and it leads to a lot of fourth wall breaking, Deadpool-esque moments where characters directly acknowledge how stupid everything is that's going on. One of my favorite examples of this in the show is when Cutie Honey is giving her classic monologue,
愛の戦士キューティーハニーさってまあ分かってて聞くのもお約束なんだけどさ
In this series, Panther Claw is so over the top in their villainy, and their motivations are so paper thin, that it's hard not to laugh at it.
目的などないただ楽しければ良いのだ我らが王がお喜びになればそれでいい
But again, this is completely intentional, and part of how the show embraces the franchise's roots while acknowledging how silly it inherently is. The show also updates the sex appeal of the character. Unlike Shin Cutie Honey, which tried to do this by having gratuitous amounts of nudity in it, Cutie Honey does this by having her clothes disappear if she runs out of energy. It's something that doesn't feel too gratuitous while at the same time feeling a lot more risque than the stuff presented in the original series. I also love how this show portrays the public's view of Cutie Honey. Much akin to how she's an anime icon in real life, Cutie Honey in this show is basically a celebrity. People watch her on TV and read about her in magazines, they talk about her as if she's some sort of famous musician or actress, and when she does appear in public, crowds cheer as she transforms into her superhero outfit. The show also updates the character by putting her in modern situations, and in doing this, the show creates more interesting conflicts than what would have already existed. For example, in the first episode, Cutie Honey is chased around the city by police who become confused after they lose her in the crowd of a cosplay convention. When they do eventually catch her, they try to arrest her for being a vigilante. This is also one of my favorite scenes of the show because we get a small cameo from a superhero duo called Penis Man and Balls Man.
僕の友達のポコイダーがブラ甘いだ
There are other smaller updates to the character that I feel are a huge improvement in making the character feel modern. Around the time Cutie Honey came out, we were getting superhero movies like Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. These were movies about superheroes trying to balance the responsibilities of their superhero life with their regular life. And Cutie Honey tries to sprinkle in a bit of this element as well. It gives Honey a traditional office job as opposed to being in some sort of weird Catholic school, and this results in a bit of conflicts whenever she can't make it to work because of her responsibilities as Cutie Honey. Cutie Honey also introduces us to the brand new character of Inspector Natsuko. From the very first episode, she is a complete badass, and as the series goes on, she ends up developing a romance with Cutie Honey. Seiji is the only one of the original 3 male cast members to return to the show, but I think that's fine as Dunbei and Junpei probably wouldn't fit very well within this adaptation. The visual presentation from the direction to the animation is consistently great from episode to episode. Without a doubt, this is the best looking Cutie Honey anime since the original series. The show is bursting with so much color and energy, mixing the classic 70s aesthetic of the franchise with modern sensibilities, and when you combine all of that with good animation, you get a show that just visually looks stellar. The music of the show is also really great, but of course that's due in large part to the soundtrack being a modern take on a lot of the classic Cutie Honey themes and music. On the subject of classic Cutie Honey music, we have to talk about the opening to this show, because it is absolutely fantastic. Since the very first time I watched Cutie Honey, this has been one of my favorite anime openings ever. And I love it now even more than I did before because it shows off exactly why this series is great. The entire opening is both a parody, a modern update, and a loving homage to everything that came before it. It's an opening that both pokes fun at and celebrates the tropes of the franchise. Even disregarding the series itself, just by watching this opening, you can tell that everyone involved in this project had so much love and passion for the Cutie Honey character. And that passion is ultimately what led to this amazing final product. This is easily the best Cutie Honey anime since the original 1973 series. And if you're interested in getting into this franchise but you're not sure if you want to start with the original series, this is absolutely the best starting point. After Cutie Honey, there wasn't another Cutie Honey anime for a really long time. Honestly, if there had never been another Cutie Honey anime after Cutie Honey, that would have been the perfect way to conclude the franchise. But unfortunately, Cutie Honey was not the last Cutie Honey anime. In 2018, more than a decade after Cutie Honey, we were unfortunately cursed with the existence of Cutie Honey Universe. Cutie Honey Universe is the complete opposite of Cutie Honey in the worst ways possible. Cutie Honey Universe is basically what would happen if you told a studio producer the basic gist of the Cutie Honey franchise, and then that studio producer decided to make an anime based solely on the information you gave him. There is a distinct lack of love or passion for the character. As a result, this show feels nothing like Cutie Honey. Spiritually speaking, this show bears no resemblance to any of the other Cutie Honey adaptations. It feels like Cutie Honey skins were put over generic characters from a modern anime. And just like Cutie Honey, the feeling you get when you watch this show is perfectly encapsulated in its opening. The visuals for this opening are bland, boring, sterile, lacking in any imagination or excitement. There's absolutely nothing about it that is fun or memorable. Even the second worst anime in the franchise, Flash, managed to have an exciting opening with great visuals. And I think the reason that is because the people making Cutie Honey Flash at least understood the appeal of the character and why so many people liked it. It's clear from just the opening of Cutie Honey Universe that they did not understand this character or this franchise at all. None of the franchise's exciting visual style or fun energy is translated in this opening. But what makes this opening not only bad, but an abhorrent crime against humanity, is that it commits the cardinal sin of not using the classic Cutie Honey theme song. Instead, it's replaced with a bland, generic modern J-rock song. Now, to give the people who made this some leeway, apparently the reason they decided to do this is because they couldn't get the rights to the original music. But even still, the lack of the classic opening theme is atrocious. Watching Cutie Honey without the classic Cutie Honey opening is like watching James Bond without the James Bond theme. It just makes it feel like an unofficial product, as if it wasn't supposed to be made, or like you bought it secondhand off of some bootleg website. I would go so far as to say that the fact that they couldn't get the rights to the original song says something about why this was made. I just have a feeling that whoever holds the rights to the original music took one look at this production and said, no, this isn't right. We are not putting our stamp of approval on this. And if that was the case, I'm sure it's because they could clearly see that this does not feel like a classic Cutie Honey production at all. Moving to the show itself, it is such a tonal mess. It has no idea what it wants to go for. Sometimes it's so deadly serious that it comes off like an edgy anime such as Tokyo Ghoul, and other times it tries so hard to be silly that it makes you cringe. But let's go back to what I said about this show feeling like Tokyo Ghoul for a second. A large part of this show feels like a modern shonen battle anime. For those of you who don't know what that term means, think stuff like Dragon Ball Z, Naruto, Bleach, One Piece, and My Hero Academia. And it feels this way from the beginning of the show. In episode 1, every single one of the fights that occur feels like something out of Dragon Ball Z. When Cutie Honey transforms, she fucking explodes and sends a beam of light into the fucking sky. It's so over the top, yet so self-serious in its presentation. At the end of episode 1, Cutie Honey faces off against Sister Jill, and they literally have an energy battle. They just start throwing energy waves at each other. Again, like this is some sort of shonen battle anime like Dragon Ball Z. It's ridiculous. It does not feel like Cutie Honey at all. This is also a good time to mention that this is one of the only fights in the series that takes place against a unique background. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the fact that every time there's a fight in this series, it takes place in this weird blue beam thing. Every time Cutie Honey transforms, this blue beam just appears out of fucking nowhere. And I guess Cutie Honey and the villains telepathically communicate with each other, and they all just go inside of this blue beam and fight inside of this blue beam. I have my gripes with a lot of modern shonen anime, but at least they're not so lazy as to have the background for every fight be the exact same. Seriously, the background for the blue beam looks like some sort of animated GIF you could download for free online. But it's not just the fights and the tone of the series that feels like some sort of modern shonen anime. Cutie Honey herself feels like a shonen protagonist in this show. In the original series, it always showed her cleverly outwitting the villains in order to overcome them. But here, there's no such clever wit going into the writing. Instead, it pulls the tired old cliche of, "Ha, I only pretended to lose because that was part of my plan so I could get the upper hand in some sort of convoluted scheme." I've complained about this trope in anime before, but here it's done really egregiously. I've said it before and I'll say it again, it is possible to do this cliche right, but in order to do so, you have to have a really well-rounded justification for it. Most of the time in modern shows, this cliche is used as a crutch for lazy writing, and there is no better example of that than how it's used in Cutie Honey Universe. Speaking of shonen anime cliches, Cutie Honey Universe also tries to paint its villains as sympathetic. In shonen battle anime, often after a battle, the protagonist will end up becoming friends with his opponent, or his opponent will have a change of heart, or we're shown that his opponent really isn't a bad person at all, and they sort of become a side character that helps the protagonist in the rest of the series. Cutie Honey Universe tries to do this as well, but where they fuck up is that they tried to do this with the monsters she was fighting. No, not Sister Jill or any other real villain character, the silly looking monsters that get killed every episode. Besides missing the point that these monsters are supposed to be fun, over the top, and not supposed to have any real character to them, the way it tries to give character to these monsters is so inconsistent and illogical. First, it attempts to do this by saying that the monsters are dedicated to Sister Jill because they just love her so much and they want her attention and affection and everything. They're just so dedicated to Sister Jill. It tries to make out like they're not actually bad people, they're just really passionate. But then, sometimes even within the same episodes it tries to communicate that, it tries to say that the monsters work for Sister Jill because they're enslaved against their will. There's an episode that basically lays out that if they don't work for Sister Jill will outright murder all of them. This is in direct contradiction with everything else the show tells you about why these monsters fight for Sister Jill. And all of this strange and poorly executed characterization is a lot of the times focused on this blue spider girl monster who's kind of like Sister Jill's right-hand monster. But because of the nature of the character herself and because of how goofy she looks, it's hard to take any of it seriously, and that only adds insult to the injury of the terrible writing and execution of these ideas. Again, none of these classic Cutie Honey monsters were meant to be taken seriously. They were meant to be dispensed in one episode, meant to be laughed at, poked fun at, defeated by Cutie Honey, and then never seen again. They are not supposed to have characters. They are not supposed to be treated seriously, and they are not supposed to act serious. So when you have a scene where a monster with giant blades for arms sits around and seriously discusses the plot and the characters within that plot, it looks really stupid. But even stupider than the portrayal of the monsters is the plan that Sister Jill comes up with to defeat Cutie Honey. At the beginning of the show, she decides to disguise herself as a detective to help Cutie Honey. Why does she do this? Honestly, I watched the entire show and I'm still not sure. She never uses her position to gain any sort of upper hand against Cutie Honey. There's never a scene where she tries to take advantage of Cutie Honey's trust in her, or manipulate Cutie Honey, or try to get information from Cutie Honey that would help her defeat her. She just kind of sits around and waits for Cutie Honey to find out who she really is, and then she just sort of twirls her little villain mustache like, ha ha ha, I tricked you, ha ha ha. And if that wasn't bad enough, apparently part of this adult woman's plan was to date a teenager who had a crush on Cutie Honey. I will repeat that. This adult woman dated a teenager. And again, I wish I could say there was any real purpose of this, that she takes advantage of that situation, or that she uses the newfound feelings in this teenager for her to take advantage of Cutie Honey, but she never does. Now, at the end of the series, Sister Jill does capture this teenager, but if that was the end goal all along, there are so many more easier, quicker, and more direct ways to capture a teenager that don't make you look like a fucking pedophile. This is a show that teeters between being frustratingly stupid and tediously dull. Despite the utter stupidity of the writing, the show takes itself so seriously that there is no way to have any fun with it. It lacks any charm whatsoever. Every previous adaptation of Cutie Honey still had some sort of silly charm to it, no matter how serious it tried to depict itself. This, on the other hand, does not have that. The only sort of fun you get in this series is when Junpei and Dunbei act like perverts, which is more often uncomfortable and awkward to watch rather than being funny. As a perfect example of what I'm talking about, there's a scene where Cutie Honey turns into a nude statue to escape from some villains because her power's running low, and after a little while of being hidden that way, Dunbei and Junpei show up and realize it looks just like Cutie Honey and literally just start molesting this statue. This would be creepy enough on its own, but because the statue actually is Cutie Honey, it is an extremely uncomfortable scene to watch. A lot of the quote-unquote comedy in this series made me more uncomfortable than anything from the 1973 series, which is saying a lot. When the uncomfortable scenes of sexual harassment and assault are over, all you're really left with is this really boring and stupid show that takes itself way too seriously. Now look, a serious take on Cutie Honey could be done, and it could be done well. And in fact, it already has been done well. I've already talked about episode 10 of Cutie Honey Flash, which I thought was a really good serious interpretation of the character, but also episode 3 of Cutie Honey was pretty serious overall. It had a darker tone and a lot more serious themes than the last 2 episodes. I'm going to admit that Cutie Honey Universe does have the groundwork to be a really good serious rendition of the character, but the execution is just terrible. Throughout the show, there's this theme of failure. Honey is continually shown to not be able to protect those closest to her. Periodically throughout the series, some huge tragedy will happen. Either someone close to her will die, like her father or her friend, or a bunch of people will die and she was completely helpless to stop it. Now, this idea in and of itself could be a great series. This could have been a show that starts out following this fun and optimistic character, and then we slowly see her descend into madness that's fueled by anger, rage, and hatred for Panther Claw, until finally, after so many deaths, she cannot take it anymore, and all of the love she has claimed to fight for is completely gone and replaced with pure, unadulterated hatred. The series could end in this really dramatic build-up where she just loses it and goes to confront Sister Jill head-on her turf. She could go on this really bloody rampage, killing monster after monster and just brutally murdering Sister Jill. And this kind of execution in the story could bring up really interesting questions about who she is as a character, her motivation, and what she was fighting for all along. In all honesty, Cutie Honey Universe had the blueprint to be a really intense character study of this iconic figure in anime. Instead, that's not what we get at all. Nothing in this show feels like it has any real weight or consequence to it. Cutie Honey's entire school is slaughtered. Her girlfriend is murdered right in front of her, but none of these events affect the story or the characters in any meaningful way. While you could spin this as the series painting Cutie Honey as a strongly resilient character, the show isn't interested in character drama enough for you to even argue that. At the end, when she goes to confront Sister Jill at her castle, it's basically because she's just like, well, nothing else has worked, so might as well try this. For a show that presents itself as seriously as Cutie Honey Universe, that's a big problem. Now, to be fair, a lot of the themes I mentioned earlier are presented, but they are never explored. A lot of the times they're just brought up in dialogue, but they're never actually applied to the characters or the situations that are occurring on screen. Let me put it this way, Cutie Honey Universe has the ingredients to be great. The story beats and themes here, if mixed together, could create something really delicious. It's like baking something. If you put a bunch of ingredients in a pot, you actually have to stir those ingredients and cook them in order to make something that tastes good. Cutie Honey Universe is like if you took a bunch of really good ingredients, put them all in the pot, but just didn't stir it or blend it or even cook it at all. You just let the ingredients sit in the pot right on top of each other. It has the potential to be something great, but you just kind of expect it to cook itself. And just like if you were actually cooking a meal this way, making a TV show this way unsurprisingly creates something that is not unique or worth consuming. Cooking analogies aside, this show also has a lot of technical flaws. I already brought up the whole blue beam thing and how that's basically used as a crutch so the animators didn't have to make unique backgrounds for every battle, but there's plenty of other flaws in the animation as well. Most of the time the animation is decent, but there's also some times where it just dips into being absolutely terrible. Similar to the battles going on in a blue beam, there are also other animations within the show that are reused over and over in order to conserve money. For example, Cutie Honey's transformation animation is the exact same every single time she transforms in every single episode. I already mentioned the lack of the classic opening sequence music, but on the whole, the music in this series is just really bland. It sounds like music you could put in the background of any stereotypical modern anime. If there was such a thing as stock anime music, a lot of the tracks from this soundtrack could be used as an example. And I feel like a big part of the reason the music feels so bland in this series is because they couldn't get the rights to that original music. But even had they gotten the rights to the original music, I seriously doubt they would have made anything good. No one or two of these factors make Cutie Honey Universe the worst Cutie Honey anime. In fact, it's really not because of any technical flaws. It's not because of any bad animation, bland music, or terrible execution of its story. Hell, if those are the only kind of standards we're using, then Cutie Honey Flash beats this by a long mile, because that show definitely had some terrible animation. No, what makes Cutie Honey Universe the worst Cutie Honey anime, above all of the technical flaws it has, is because it does not retain the spirit of the franchise. It's a series that isn't fun, it's not charming, it's too serious, it is completely soulless, and it is an update, but in the worst possible way, by replacing all of the fun and campiness of the original franchise with boring modern shonen cliches. Now, I do want to mention a few good things that were in this show, and trust me, there's not many, but I do feel that they are worth mentioning. The first thing I liked about the show is that Cutie Honey's lesbian relationship is finally explored in this anime. From what I understand in the manga, Cutie Honey actually has a lesbian relationship, but in every anime adaptation, that lesbian relationship was not shown. In this show, we finally get to see that relationship in anime form, even if it is executed really terribly. I also like that this is basically the only anime that fully explores the extent of Cutie Honey's powers. I mean, she's literally equipped with a matter transformer. That implies a lot of things, but in the original series, all she really does with it is change outfits really quick. In this show, she is shown to have have the capacity to change her entire body. For example, in one episode, she completely turns into a Panther Claw henchman. She changes the appearance of her face, her voice, her gender, in addition to her clothes. And it makes her powers and transformations seem that much more impressive. There's also that episode I mentioned earlier where she turns her skin into stone in order to look like a statue, and then there's yet another episode where she hides someone else by materializing a hollow rock around them. And I think this is the one smart aspect of the show. While I don't think the show fully explores the extent of that power, I do think it goes further than every other Cutie Honey anime so far. And as far as positives go, that's pretty much it. But even those tiny positives don't begin to redeem the show from all of its flaws. I would go so far as to say that Cutie Honey Universe is one of the worst anime I've ever seen. Now, take that opinion with a grain of salt, as I don't go out of my way to watch bad anime, so it's not like I'm any expert as to what's the worst anime ever, but in my personal experience, it ranks on up there with some of the worst I've seen. It goes without saying, but just don't fucking watch Cutie Honey Universe. It's not worth it. Stay far away from it. And with that, my marathon of the Cutie Honey franchise is complete. I have now seen every iteration of the Cutie Honey character. It's been a wild ride full of some of the best and worst anime that I've ever seen. While the inconsistent quality of this franchise might lead you to wonder why I even made this video in the first place, ultimately it's because of my love for the character in the original 1973 series. I had so much fun with that original series that I just knew I had to make some sort of video promoting it. Because this is a character in a franchise that really doesn't have a lot of exposure in Western anime circles. So it's with all that I say that I highly recommend this franchise. Obviously, above everything else, I recommend the original 1973 series and the Cutie Honey OVA. But if any of the Cutie Honey anime I discussed in this video piqued your interest, then please check it out. Because I think Cutie Honey is not only a really important figure in anime history, but also a really great character that has stood the test of time as just being a really entertaining piece of media. Whether you love animation or into superheroes, or maybe you love the genre of magical girls itself, you'll find a lot of things to appreciate in the Cutie Honey franchise. If you've watched this far into the video, then I want to thank you for sticking through to the end. I know it was probably a really long one, so I appreciate your time, especially since this video was not easy to make. I initially started making this video back in June, so the process of making this video has been very long as I've delayed it several times to work on other video projects. But despite how long it took to make, what kept me going is my passion for this character. So I'm glad it's finally done, and I hope you guys got something out of it. At the very least, now you have something interesting to put on your watch list. As always, I'm Randall, and thank you for listening to me ramble.
変わるわよ。
この頃流行りの女の子をお尻の G